name is Becky Anderson, and I work for Macmillan. Today, you're going to be listening to the fabulous John Dan Johnson Aiola, who us about using what your students do already, tech skills for communicating. Before we start, how this is going to work, everyone who is attending, unmute because we have a big crowd today. So John Dan's going to do a presentation, and as he's going along, if you have questions, type them into the chat over on the right, into the Q&A, whatever works for you. I will type the chat once he starts to talk so you can see. So he will finish his presentation, and any of the questions that have come in, everyone can hear the question and everyone can hear the answer. I think that's the only sort of thing we have this morning. So we now have John Dan Johnson Aiola from Clark University talking to us about students do already, optimizing students communicating. Are you ready, sir?
I am ready. Hey, thanks, Becky. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm going to talk about some different ways that you can help your students more effectively use technologies when they're writing. Students obviously already use technology, but I'm often baffled by the simplicity of their use, their unreflective nature. But I guess this is common of people in general. We use technology, but we fail to step back, even occasionally, and ask ourselves how we can improve our use of the technology, how we could tweak something to make us more effective. Basically, I want to talk about hacking writing. None of what I'm going to cover today is earth-shattering, but it's a collection of things I've accumulated over the past several decades that have been teaching students in computer-supported classrooms. Most of you will be familiar with some of these things, but I hope that you'll find at least a few that can enrich your work with students. When I started teaching writing with computers, storage was a big issue. At that point, there wasn't enough storage. Disks that were affordable to average users gave you 360K. That's a third of a meg. For the youngest among you, today a free Dropbox cloud storage account gives you almost 6,000 times that much space. But today, cheap vast storage leads to a different problem. We fill our hard drives with so many files that without some organizational techniques, we'd lose things. Carefully thought out directory structures can help students organize information so it's easier to find things. Good directory structures also help us to maintain things. If you're not sure what information is, you're often afraid to throw anything out, which only increases the problem. Here's an example. This is a single class folder. Inside the folder are subfolders for various categories or projects with more added as needed. You notice that the file naming conventions here make it relatively easy to find things. I have an exercise I use near the start of semesters. I ask students how they search for course-related information. Is it by course number, by semester year, simply by semester, or is everything just in a big pile? Sometimes we do this as an informal assignment for discussion in class, but other times I'll make it more formal, asking students to interview each other, collect screenshots, and more. It's part of a process of helping students become more self-aware of their work processes. One common and effective strategy here couples year, semester, course, and assignment like what you can see in the screenshot. English 101, and then research paper, and then inside that research paper, various files and drafts with notes. Sometimes when locating things by date is important, you can start the folder or file name with year and month, not the normal US convention of month, date, and year. This is useful when one directory is going to contain a lot of files that you want to be able to skim quickly. I use something like this for long-running committees, but students might use it for the directory that holds all their course notes for their college career or their class notes for one course. This is an alternative to multiple layers of folders. It's a trade-off. Having a folder named after a year, holding one named after a semester, holding one named after a course, keep things neat, but you have to do a lot of digging to get to anything. And also another quick tip, some non-alphanumeric characters like an underscore can be used to force something to the start or end of a sorted by name view. Reserve things like this for items that will be referred to frequently. For students, that might be the assignment sheet for a specific project or the folder for the class project they're currently working on. File names themselves are an overlooked organizational tool. Students often give a file a single, overly simplistic name like sa1.docx. This approach is bad in several ways. First, students and teachers can't look at the development of a text over time. If you have students' version files, either by simple numbers or dates integrated into the file name, you can let students and teachers compare early versions of a draft to later versions. This lets you see how a text is developed over time. Do students work on large-scale issues early, or are they wasting time copy editing in an early draft? Second, students looking at a folder of files cannot easily tell what's in each file, requiring them to open multiple files in order to find what they're looking for. And when students share files, the recipient can't easily tell what's in the file or who it's from. ResearchPaper.docx isn't as useful as something like Comp 103 Research Paper 1, version 2.3 eHazen.docx. I'm sure some of you at this point in the semester already have a set of 40 or 60 files called sa1.docx. And this should be an obvious one, but it's not for my students and some of my colleagues. This is a way to get around the "my hard drive crashed" excuse. In order to head this off, it requires students to come up with some sort of backup strategy. Even copying files from the computer to cloud storage is better than nothing. But if your school has a set of network drives for on-campus storage, remind your students to keep a copy on their own computer or flash drive, but also a version on the network drive. As I mentioned earlier, paying attention to file names becomes important, especially with files on multiple drives. There are also apps like Windows Backup and Time Machine on OS X that can automatically back up files to another disk. Even better would be an automated offsite system like CrashPlan, which backs up files automatically to an offsite location. Most students won't pay the $100 a fee that services like this cost, but programs like CrashPlan offer a free variation that allows students to automatically back up from one computer to another, which is useful for students who have both a desktop computer and a laptop, but it could also be adapted by students who live together to back up to each other's computers. CrashPlan allows the files to be encrypted so that you can't look at each other's files if you back up somebody else's computer. Okay, I want to talk to something I mentioned briefly, storage in the cloud. There are lots of ways to share files. Email works in some cases, but in other cases it won't work because of file limitations, file size limitations imposed by servers, or even for some users who have overall storage space in their email accounts limited. For the last few semesters, I've started relying heavily on Dropbox. If you're not familiar with it, Dropbox is a cloud storage program that offers, as I said, access to 2 gigs of cloud storage from nearly any device with internet access. It includes apps for iPhone and Android. Users on computers without the application can still access their files from a web browser, so basically you can get to your files from any place. Now, sometimes cloud storage is less of an issue for those of you that use classroom management software like Blackboard, but I've never been able to get comfortable with the restrictions involved in those systems. And things like Dropbox are useful across a wide range of contexts, for example, being able to get to your file from any computer or smartphone. Now, for my purposes, one useful feature is the ability to share files among users in the cloud. In my classes, I have each student create a free Dropbox account, and inside that account, I have them create a directory with a title based on the course number and their last name. Then they share these folders with me so I can view their assignments and create comments in the files for students to see. I also share class materials with them by putting the files into their folders. There are similar options from, among many others, Google and Microsoft. Go with whatever company's socioeconomic practices disgust you the least. And for me, that's Dropbox. This screen shows one of the naming convention issues that I mentioned earlier. I asked students to create a folder in the Dropbox account and then share it with me. As you can see, several students have named their folder Audio Production and one simply Com360, so I don't know whose students these folders belong to. After I took this screenshot, I had the students delete the vaguely named folders and rename them with something that included their last names. Now, there's going to be, with any technology, some stumbling blocks along the way, so I make setting up a Dropbox folder correctly an initial assignment in class that's worth a small number of points so we can get the bugs worked out before the real assignments are due. There's a variant on cloud storage with applications like Evernote. Evernote draws on cloud storage, but it includes some additional features. It gives you research tools including tagging notes, sharing notes, and annotating notes. You can set reminders or alarms on notes. You can create audio and image notes, and even has a presentation mode. Evernote accounts include what they call notebooks, and then notes are arranged in each notebook, as you can probably guess. Notes can be just about any different media type you have. You can capture web pages, you can insert text directly, you can create lists, you can import PDFs, images, or audio. We'll also capture or import audio. And one of the other features is there are Evernote plugins called clippers for pretty much every common web browser and operating system. And it allows you to clip or copy the context and URL of a web page you're reading. This is really handy for students, obviously, if you're doing research on the web. When you clip a site, you can also add the page to a specific notebook in Evernote. You can add tags, as I said, and annotations and other information before saving it. As with Dropbox, one of the interesting features for classroom use is that you can share notes or notebooks with other people, making it a good research tool for collaborative work. Evernote also provides you with a window into some aspects of the students' research processes. If you have students create a notebook to collect their research notes, they can share that notebook with you so you can see their source materials, what they've collected, when they've collected it, how they've tagged it, what notes they've inserted, and more. Students can also give you permission to annotate their notes to call out details or questions that they may have missed. You can add a tag like feedback to any notes that you annotate so students can search for your comments within their notebook. So it makes a good tool for looking at research processes in an ongoing way. Now I want to switch a little bit and talk about space as it relates to writing and technology. Part of my interest in space grows out of surprising things I found out when I was doing research on how people work. At the time, I was interested in complex interfaces that supported advanced knowledge work, including things like video and audio production. I worked with a grad student named David Dees at SUNY Potsdam's Crane School of Music. David was writing a commissioned piece for live trumpet and prepared CD. On the computing side, David used audio recording, editing, and mixing application called Pro Tools, which is really common in audio production circles. It's very powerful, but it's also very complex in terms of the interface and the processes you use. I was interested in interface design, so I assumed David would be staring at a computer screen and I'd be watching what he did in the computer. But the image shown here was the exception rather than the rule during the time that I observed David working. The scenario shown here was much more common. Although Pro Tools was open on the computer in front of David in the room, he spent the majority of his time working with a rack of keyboard synths. He was tweaking knobs and pressing keys and taking notes with a pen in a well-used notebook. He paced around the room, trying different instruments. He scowled while he made adjustments until he was happy enough with the sound that he scribbled down the settings into his notebook. Only infrequently, I'd say a handful of times during the 2 hours I observed him, would he turn to the computer and capture a specific sound. So I didn't get what I thought I was going to get, but I got something more interesting. This relatively small computer screen, it turned out, was only a small part of the space that David worked within. It was a crucial sliver of his space, but much more important, at least during this phase, was the physical space he was moving within. David was interested in having the information out in front of him, of having tools at hand. As I said, David is an example of a knowledge worker. Knowledge workers are people who work with ideas, concepts, and facts. They don't necessarily produce tangible items like a factory worker outputting goods. Knowledge workers are people like programmers, architects, lawyers, and college professors. I found this kind of activity again and again as I observed people doing advanced knowledge work. Knowledge workers wanting to get the information out in front of them. Now, as you might guess, much writing is knowledge work, and computers have increased that aspect of writing. So drawing on the habits of skilled knowledge workers can give us some important insights into what we should be helping our students learn how to do. Here's another scene from an expert knowledge worker's space. This is David Summerstein, or a Peabody Award-winning reporter and a DJ at North Country Public Radio down the road from me. David's sifting through CDs during his Friday afternoon World Music Show. During the 2-hour broadcast, David roams around the room, picking out songs from discs in an iPod, jotting down notes, working faders and buttons on the mixer, answering the phone, writing down his ever-evolving set list. David was constantly in motion. Although we might easily categorize the creation of an afternoon radio broadcast as primarily cognitive and immaterial, knowledge work is often as much physical as mental. Cognition and embodiment are two sides of the same coin. The mind-body split, after all, is a fiction. Students could benefit from seeing the physical space they're working in as part of their researching / inventing / writing / revising spaces. Having textual reminders, outlines, research notes, section headings, etc. provides a rich environment for knowledge work. Now, sometimes information exceeds its boundaries. Some of you may have seen this picture before because I've used it in conference presentations a few times. This is a fairly representative picture of my home office. It's also a fairly representative picture of the inside of my head. I took this picture while I was working on a book. My strategy here was, after watching these knowledge workers, to get as much information out in front of me, to keep it within view, to prompt myself to think about it, and actively, both physically and cognitively, actively forging connections across disparate items. This is sort of an unorthodox approach, but getting the information out there in front of you is a strategy I saw knowledge workers drawing on over and over, using whiteboards, desks and tables, Post-its, and multiple monitors. Whiteboards and Post-its are a low-tech, inexpensive way of supporting knowledge work. They also encourage collaboration. Collaborative work is often actually crippled by the computer, with only one student able to access the keyboard and mouse at a time. With Post-its and whiteboards, students perform an elaborate improvised dance, pointing to notes, moving them, discussing them, arranging them in different categories. The open, malleable physical space always ends up being much more engaging than when they sit in front of a single computer screen. Now, most of our students don't see themselves as knowledge workers, but that's something we have to sort of vigorously push them toward. I want to go back to the monitor issue. As I said, one of the things that knowledge workers tend to do is to try and get information and resources out in front of them, as much visible in hand as possible. 21-inch LCD monitors, which is a fairly small size, but they're well under $100, so you can fairly easily afford to have several of them running at once. They're much less expensive than, say, 27 or 40-inch monitors. And you don't necessarily need that huge, uninterrupted, expansive space. It's an easy trade-off for the cost. So many knowledge workers tend to run multiple complex applications when they work. Web designers and coders, for example, might run Dreamweaver, Photoshop, Illustrator, and a testing browser, working across each simultaneously, updating CSS code while viewing the results in one or more testing browsers. When I work writing, I'm often working in 5 or more applications: web browsers for drawing on internet sources, a word processor, a separate text app for simple notes that I'm referring to as I write, Evernote, as you might guess, an Illustrator or Photoshop for image editing if what I'm writing needs it, and increasingly it does, and of course iTunes. So it's hard to work that way with a single mid-sized monitor. Many students work within the confines of a single display, but knowledge work, including writing from research, benefits greatly from additional screen real estate. But in my observation, students tend to use their screen real estate inefficiently, even when they have multiple monitors. They maximize one app in a single monitor and ignore the one next to it. Power users, though, knowledge workers, tend to capitalize on as much screen real estate as they can, working across multiple apps on 2 or more monitors. Knowledge workers with deep enough pockets often sit in what look like war room control centers with multiple keyboards and 6 or more monitors right in front of them. That's sort of an extreme, but we need to put ourselves toward that end of the continuum when we can. Students tend to think of writing as simpler than it really is, more like typing, as Truman Capote once said, than writing. We need to help our students understand that writing is a complex form of knowledge work. They can benefit from having a word processor, research notes, maybe an image editor, and a web browser on screen at the same time. Although they're going to focus on one at a time, being able to refer quickly to, say, a bibliographic search in a web browser while they're writing a word processing program can make them work more efficiently. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit here. First-year comp is often the place where students learn how to work academically. They learn things like time and resource management. Teaching students some simple project management skills can help them succeed academically, not just in first-year comp, but in all their courses in their life. This is a simple Gantt chart, obviously, for a team project running several weeks. I'll just point out a few key features since you're probably already familiar with these. These are things they teach students how to do for larger projects, especially collaborative ones. This project's been broken down in a series of stages that progress in a waterfall to the right as the project goes on. The research stage is broken into subtasks, each one assigned to 1 or more students. The student's initials in the date column show during what time frame that work should be done and who's responsible for it. And I should add, this Gantt chart is just done in an Excel spreadsheet rather than something dedicated like Microsoft Project, which is overkill for probably most of the projects that your students work on. You just resize the cells as necessary in Excel. Each successive stage in the project starts a little bit later. There's a waterfall going across from left to right. Students finish their work in one stage, and then they pick up their work in the later stage for a different portion of the project. Students could, if necessary, and we do this for some class projects, augment this by adding colors or more information. For example, each student could be assigned a color so they could easily spot where their work is taking place. Now, Gantt charts in writing projects are a really powerful form of information visualization. They allow everyone on the team to see what's going on, including aspects such as fair division of workload over time. Students can also be taught to apply a little bit of critical assessment. Is the work being divided up evenly among the team members? Is there hidden effort? For example, does allotting 5 days to running a survey really require 5 times as much effort as interviewing the center director? At this stage, you can ask students to start to estimate the amount of time a task is going to take, and then periodically have them look back at their assessments to see if they're accurate, which is a really crucial writing task. A similar project management technique is calendaring. Calendaring applications are often underused by students who see them as just extra work. I'm surprised at how many students don't keep an updated calendar on their smartphone or laptop. Instead, I frequently just see them referring to the one-week schedule they generated when they registered for classes, and then ad hoc reminders like Post-its attached to their computer monitor. By requiring students to keep calendars for larger writing projects, you can help demonstrate that important scaffolding work is worth the extra effort. If you inject calendar use with a little project management know-how, you can help students stay on track. Students can share calendars with teammates for collaborative projects, or even with the instructors, a way to make sure they're keeping pace with their assignments. Easy-to-use calendaring apps are built into most operating systems, and free services like Google Calendar are ubiquitous. In some cases, I require students to set up and maintain a calendar in the hopes that if they get into the habit of using it, even just for the requirements of my class, they'll eventually start to use it in other places. I'm going to end with some miscellaneous notes on things that I've picked up along the way. I don't want to marginalize them by putting them at the end of this, but because some of these are actually things that I use very frequently. They're just at the tail end here because they don't fit neatly into one of the categories that I've set up. You may already probably be familiar with this feature, Word's margin notes. They're an important way to allow peer reviewers and teachers to comment directly in the text at both the local and global levels. Multiple reviewers can add comments to a document with each note associated with the person who wrote it. Before Word implemented this feature, you had to either insert comments into the text, flagging them with a special character or putting them in brackets or something similar so students could find them, or you had to print out the essay and write the comments by hand in the margins. Now, if you don't use Microsoft Word, there's probably something built into the app you're using, or you can come up with a workaround. Back in the days before this feature was available in Word, I ran a workshop that used a specialized app for commenting on student writing by offering marginal comment features. One of the attendees the next day showed me how he could use the invisible paragraph markers in a document to convert the full text of a document into a 2-column table, with the original text in the left column, 1 paragraph per cell. The right column then cells provided space for a teacher or a peer reviewer to insert comments. The 2 cells in the row were obviously attached, so the comments were always linked to the text that was being commented on. Now, there's a lot to hate about Microsoft Word. One of my most frequent tweets is still hating Microsoft. But the track changes feature is actually a really powerful way to follow the revision process in a visual way as a teacher. This feature can show you how a student has revised their text from one draft to the next. In Word, Track Changes is located under the Tools menu. There are several options, including things like tracking the text that is simply moved, tracking whether or not the changes are highlighted on screen or in print. So you can explore what works best for your specific situations. You can use Track Changes in conjunction with the Margin Notes feature so that you and your students can follow the process of commentary and revision. It's a little bit cumbersome to use for every assignment, but I resort to this occasionally just to see what my students are doing over time as they work on drafts, and to see how they're responding to both my comments and their peers' comments. It's a way to help you discuss metacognitive processes with them as they write. Now, the feature is also useful in collaborative writing so that members of the team can see how specific things were changed by another team member, and they can go through and accept the changes using the reviewing the pane, or you can put a hold on them so the team can discuss any disagreements before they're made. Frequently when people collaborate, the changes get made invisibly, so you're left sort of having to reread everything from scratch every time and trying to remember who made what changes at what point. So when I collaborate on documents with people, we turn on Track Changes from the start and follow it throughout the process. So here's my last point, which is kind of a pet peeve for me, uninformative subject lines in email. Email subject lines can actually be used as part of a very valuable, tiny rhetorical exercise for your students. It's a useful way to help them understand how audiences interpret text in context while they work. I bring up email subject lines as a topic early in the class, in the semester for classes. Usually the class period after I've had students submit an assignment as an attachment to email. I'll take some screenshots of my inbox or the folder I've set up in my email client showing the index with rows of subject lines for the emails. I blur out the sender's name in Photoshop to avoid pointing fingers at individual students, shaming them, which isn't very productive in class. And then in class we talk about how the recipient, who's me, is going to process the subject lines of these messages as I'm completing a few simple tasks, skimming all of my inbox to locate emails from this particular class so I can save all the draft files to a directory on my computer. So I asked them, do any of you see subject lines that use the course number in the subject line or an informative title for the assignment? If the subject lines just say something like draft 1, which is better than nothing, which some of my students do, how do I separate all the draft 1s for the various classes I have when I'm trying to save drafts just for one specific class? So I have them take my perspective as I explain what it is, and then I'll turn to a similar set of screenshots to analyze file names, which we've already talked about. And this is a way to help students understand that why it's important to take the perspective of the people they're attempting to communicate with. And it helps them see that effective writing is complex knowledge work. It's not just simply typing. It's an activity that requires them to draw on a range of strategies and approaches. Using technologies wisely and critically can help them enrich their work. I hope that what I've covered here has given you some ideas on how to improve your students' writing and maybe your own, and how we use technology in writing. More importantly, I hope what we've covered will help you start to think more about other ways that you might hack writing to make it richer, more effective for your students and yourself. Most of the images I've used here are mine, but there are a few I've borrowed through the generosity of people using Creative Commons licenses. If you want to follow up with me about any of this, here's my contact info. I think we have time now to open it up to discussion if we have any comments from people. Are there any questions, or would you like to share technologies or tips that you have for improving how your students use technology in the writing? What things have worked for you and your students?
So again, you can post any sort of questions or comments either into the chat field or into the Q&A, and in the chat field you can send them either to Macmillan Education or to all presenters, all panelists, or to Becky Anderson. You have a couple starter questions here. How do you sort of convey all this information to students? Do you do this in the first day class? Is this in a syllabus? Is this out throughout the class?
It ends up being throughout the class. I mean, some of the things like the email subject line discussion are almost always during the second week of class when I started to turn things in, and I have examples of their bad subject lines. The other things come up periodically throughout the class, like talking about whiteboard usage. We have something called a smart board in the back of our lab, which is a large touchscreen TV you can draw on with special markers. And as we use that for projects, I'll talk to students about the physical space that they're writing, and sometimes do a brief assignment where they take a picture of the writing space and they bring it into class and share them with each other and talk about what their ideal writing space is, what their current writing space is. So these are all sort of things that come up as they occur in class over the semester.
So do you only do this in like a freshman composition class, or do you do this in all of your classes?
I do this in all my classes, partly because I approach all my classes like freshman composition classes. I don't teach grad students at Clarkson. We don't have a grad program. So all the undergrad classes that I teach, we go over at least some of these things. They're sort of universal. The issues with subject lines, with directory structures, file naming, physical space, virtual space. Those are for any kind of class that I teach is involved with knowledge work, so it's going to come up in there somewhere.
Can you explain a little more about using the Google Docs comments for creating two tables or layers?
I'm not sure that was in Google Docs. That was just in a word processor. Are you talking about the thing where they put comments in with two columns?
I believe that's correct.
You could, I'm not sure if it's possible in Google Docs, but most word processors have a way to search for invisible characters. They do a find and replace or convert to table. So whatever application you're using, see whether or not it allows you to take text and convert it to table. I think the person that did this initially did when they converted text to a table, it just said, most of the time when you do that, it said what we use as the marker for each cell. And they said to use the paragraph marker. I think you could probably also do this in most spreadsheet programs.
That was exactly the answer needed.
Thank you.
What is the most surprising thing that students sort of lack or unaware of when they come to your class?
How harsh I am? No, I think in general they're not self-critical, and that's something I struggle with in all my classes to get the students to do, to think about the processes that they're working with, to think about who is going to be using the text that they create. They do tend to get better over time with that. So I have students that I've had in a series of 2 or 3 courses because I teach a pretty wide range of things. And when they come in as first-year students, they don't use calendaring programs. They think of writing as typing. But by the time I see them as seniors, they're starting to get some sense of the fact that they have to think about what they're doing instead of just replying to things. Early on, they do things like, I call it just checking the box. You know, to give them an assignment, they just complete it as fast as they can. They don't think about why they're completing it or what the goals might be for that assignment. And I'm not sure, I don't think it's really just necessarily that I've taught them how to do this, but by the time they get to be seniors, they've figured out that they need to think in more broad terms. And that's true of everything. It's true of technology. It's true of writing situations. It's true of life.
All right, I will give people just a moment to see if anybody else has any other questions to put in. But in the meantime, thank you very much for doing this today, John Dan. I know that it's a little odd to do your presentations with no feedback from the people.
Staring at a computer.
So thank you very much for doing this today. And for those of you who came, we have been recording. We will post probably in the next week or two, and we'll let you know when those recordings have been posted. So if you want to pass this on to colleagues, you want to read this later so that you can adjust your class at the beginning of next semester, that would be totally available. Well, I think that's it for today.
Well, thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you. Talk to you guys later. Bye.